Welcome to the Success Ascent. My name is Pat Mancuso, and I'm the creator and host of our show. And we are excited today to be with Len Herstein. Now, let me tell you about Len. Good morning, Len, or afternoon, wherever you are.
Hey.
We're glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
So, Len has over 30 years experience in business and brand marketing. Prior to founding his marketing and events company, ManageCamp Inc., Len innovated, managed, and grew brands for major consumer products like Campbell Soup, Coca-Cola, and Nabisco. Interesting little sidelight. Since 2015, Len has served as a reserve deputy sheriff with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office in Orlando, and I'm sure we could have an amazing conversation around that. However, that's not why we're here today. He's an author of Be Vigilant, Strategies to Stop Complacency, Improve Performance, and Safeguard Success. Your business and relationships depend upon it, he says, and his mission is to empower organizations and individuals to safeguard the success that they've worked so hard for. So, Len, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Douglas County is actually in Colorado.
Oh, Colorado. I wanted to make it in Florida.
Yeah. You know what? Today, I would much prefer to be in Florida. It's
Me too. It's snowing here.
-6 here. So
yeah, it's snowing here. We're getting a major snowstorm, and obviously in Colorado, you're familiar with that as well.
Yeah.
So, Len, I always like to have some fun with my guests, and I say that was Len on paper.
Yeah.
Tell us something about Len that maybe somebody's never heard, or some fun fact that we didn't hear about.
Wow. I mean, so, the fun fact that most people are surprised to hear is the fact that I'm a cop. So we've already covered that one. I love to play poker. I'm a big poker player.
No way.
Yeah, I do. I enjoy it. And, yeah, and back when I was younger, I backpacked by myself through Australia for several months and skydived over the Great Barrier Reef and did all sorts of cool stuff. So that was my old self. I don't jump out of planes anymore, but I do police work. So there you go.
I love it. I love it. So real quick, what type of poker do you play?
I played No Limit Hold'em.
High five. High five. It's so cool to be back where you can actually play tournaments, right?
Yeah, I'm a cash player. I'm not great at tournaments.
Okay.
I don't have the attention span to sit there and play those levels. But I love the fact that we're back playing live. I just it's nice to be sitting down at a table with people.
No doubt, no doubt. So, Len, let's talk about it. I always like to spend the first part of our conversation talking about your entrepreneurial journey. So, like what you've learned as an entrepreneur. And so let's start with, like, how did you get into being an entrepreneur? Like, what drove you to that?
It's interesting. I didn't know I wanted to do it. I didn't know I had an entrepreneurial bug. I didn't kind of go through my career just thinking about that. But, I'm old enough that I got into the .com craze.
Yep.
So back in 2000, I joined a startup that was in Fort Collins, Colorado. We were an online grain exchange and also a transportation exchange for truckers. And, that was the first time that I had worked for a small startup type company. All my other experiences have been with big, huge multinational organizations. And so, coming out of that, I realized, man, I've got a real, passion for this, but, we failed. And I went back to work and went to work for Campbell Soup in New Jersey, but that fire had been lit. And so, I started looking at things from a new light, thinking about what could I do? And that's where, I came up with this idea of, I was at a conference one day and just realized I wasn't having any fun. I wasn't enjoying it. Most people around me weren't enjoying it, but they kept coming. We kept coming back every year. I was like, wow, the bar is low here. There's some white space. There's some opportunity. And so that's where I created my conference and event company.
I love it. I love it. So let's talk just real quick. Let's talk about, when you failed, because, one of the things that most entrepreneurs don't realize is you have to fail in order to succeed and have a higher level of success. What did that first failure, what did you learn and what did you take away from it moving to your venture of ManageCamp?
Yeah. I had lots of micro failures along the way. One of the things that I had already learned from being in innovation on other businesses was this concept of failing fast and failing cheap. And so that was something that I kind of embraced, wholeheartedly when I started ManageCamp. And, this was starting a conference and event company is difficult because you have to kind of, it's one of these like field of dreams things. You got to build it and hope people come.
Right.
And all the cost goes in up front. So you've got all these responsibilities, all these commitments, all these contracts you're signing with hotels and audiovisual vendors and speakers and all these things. And then you spend all the money on the advertising and the marketing. And then you kind of hope people show up. And so, what was really important for me to be able to get through that beginning stage was to, make sure if I was failing cheap and I was failing fast. And so it was all about negotiating the right contracts, finding the right outs, getting the right pricing from people and doing a lot, making sure that I was covering my downside, really helped us kind of make it through some early stumbles. One of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of, and I certainly was one of them, was I overvalued the value of my existing relationships. So I came into it and said, you know what? I've been in marketing for years. I know all these brand marketers. I'm creating a conference for brand marketers, and all these people that I used to work with are all leading teams now. If I can get each one of them to just send one person to my event, we're golden. We've made our numbers, right?
Yeah.
And and that to me seemed logical at the time.
Yeah.
The reality was all these people, not because they're bad people or not good friends, but they also have their own things. They have budgets that they're managing. They have, goals that they have to manage. They have different things. They have, constraints on their training budgets, whatever it was. And so that did not come to fruition. The success in my early days was not due to friends and colleagues sending people to my event. We had to go out and find them. And so that was a lesson we learned really quick when we reached out, and all of a sudden it was kind of crickets for a while. And we were thinking, we might have misjudged what we got to do here a little bit.
That marketing idea didn't quite go the way we wanted to. Now, when was that? Like, when did you start ManageCamp?
So that was 2003.
Okay.
So 2003 was our first one. In some ways, things were a little bit easier back then. It was kind of the early stages of email and things like that. So you didn't have spam filters and all those things that you had to deal with. You sent an email and it got through and people opened it and read it. And, that a lot easier to reach people. But at the same time, we struggled at the beginning for sure.
So as you started off as an entrepreneur, and obviously you had that failure, and yet now you've grown obviously successfully. What surprised you in your journey? Like, is there anything that you kind of weren't expecting?
I think what I wasn't expecting going into it, and I think also what I've heard from other entrepreneurs is something that's surprising them as well. It's just how hard it is. People think that, I'm going to work for myself and my life's going to get easier. Like those days of kind of 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever you were working, which you thought were too many hours before when you were working for someone else, expands, right? You're never off. You're working 7 days a week. You're doing, it's not, you can, it's the rare person who can turn it off, and usually not the person who's bootstrapping and trying to build a business.
Absolutely.
Those are not the people who turn it off. So I think that was the thing that was probably the most surprising, was that, my life certainly got harder, and it doesn't get easier year to year. You're always kind of, eating what you kill, right? You got to keep going out there and you got to keep hunting and you got to keep working, and you can't rest on your laurels. So
absolutely. Well, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Brandon T. Adams, and he said something right along that line. He said, just take what you think it's going to require an effort and 10x it, because that's what it's going to be as an entrepreneur. So pretty common. So let me ask you this question. If you were to go back and talk to a 20-year-old version of yourself and say, you're starting out as an entrepreneur, what are a couple things you would share with them to pay a lot of attention to, skills to learn, or just something to help them succeed faster, higher on the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would definitely hone in on the kind of networking and the contact development and the relationship building. I think it's really, really easy to get deep into the details because I always joke, I'm the CEO / janitor. Like I'm everything. I got to do everything. Like the trash isn't getting emptied, especially those early stages, trash doesn't get emptied unless I empty it. And we don't, pay our bills unless I pay them. And so, it's easy to get sucked into the details and forget about, the value of relationships and not just making it transactional and making it more, emotion based and form, true relationships with people. So, I think that was something that took me a little while to figure out, as it was all about like, how do I accomplish that, get this done, and then moving on to the next thing. So, you kind of lose the value of those things along the way. I think the other thing that I would certainly go back, especially, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but all the stuff I've learned about complacency and vigilance and how easy it is to become complacent once you start experiencing that success.
Sure.
And how dangerous that can be down the road.
So we're going to shift there in a second. I want to pull one other thing out of you. If you had to look at, because you brought up relationships twice, what would you say is the difference that you said you overestimated the relationships in the experience that didn't go so well. So what did you do different to build or foster those relationships that you could share?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that people lose sight of is, giving before asking. And we're seeing it all the time on LinkedIn, right? Like people reach out and like the second you click the accept button, you're getting hit with sales messages. It's like, what? I don't know. All I said was, yeah, we can connect. That's it. Like I'm not.
Yeah. Doesn't that just turn you off? Like I just wish that somebody would figure that out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. But it all relates back to the same concept, which is, if you enter every relationship thinking, what can I get out of this?
Right.
You're gonna find yourself with a problem. And if you think about every relationship in terms of its value to you and ranking it in terms of what people can deliver to you, if you approach those relationships with what value can I bring to you, I think the value comes back eventually. Maybe not from the relationship that you thought it would, right? And so, that's really important. I think one of the most important things in terms of relationships is really having that, selfless point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about, so you write this book and you're studying around, you title it Be Vigilant, Strategies to Stop Complacency. Come on, Len, nobody is complacent. Are you kidding me?
The problem is nobody thinks they're complacent.
That's it, right? Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, complacency is an interesting word. So, I mean, this came from my, like we said, 7 years ago, I became a reserve sheriff's deputy. I wanted to be, get into volunteering and be part of the community. And this was what I found that I love to do. And I do it for free. And I'm a full-fledged police officer. I do everything that police officer does. I went into it thinking it was going to be something completely different than anything I'd ever done before. But what surprised me was things I was learning that I was applying back to my business life and my personal life. And the first thing in the academy that we learn is this idea of complacency kills. And I started thinking, you know what? Yes, complacency kills in law enforcement, but complacency kills businesses. It kills brands. It kills organizations. It kills relationships, both personal and professional. Sure. And so I started getting kind of, interested in this idea of complacency. And what I started realizing is that complacency has become like a throwaway word in society. We've seen it a lot around recently. And every time we start to get over the hump of a challenge, we start seeing these articles, we're getting complacent or people are getting complacent, but people just throw that word out. And we see it in sporting events, they're getting complacent out there. Let's not get complacent, but nobody ever talks about what it means and how do you fight it, right? Which is the most important part. And I think if you ask most people what complacency means to them, they probably say something around the area of laziness. But the reality is complacency is not laziness. Complacency is an overconfidence, a self-satisfaction, even sometimes a smugness that comes from past success and results in us becoming unaware of potential threats. Okay. And the difference between complacency and laziness is that laziness is a choice, right? So we make a conscious choice when we have the ability to do something that we know needs to get done and we choose not to do it because we don't want to put in the effort. That's laziness. I could clean the kitchen right now, or I could watch the football game. I choose to watch the football game. That's me being lazy, right? Complacency is different because complacency is very rarely a conscious choice for the same thing that nobody ever thinks that they're being complacent because you don't see it. You don't see it. It's you become so overconfident that you think you have everything under control and you miss the warning signs. And that's why complacency is so dangerous, because we're most vulnerable to it when we're experiencing success. And not only are we most vulnerable to it, but we have more to lose because we're successful. And so whatever you're having success in business or in life, complacency is kind of like laying there in the background, waiting for that environment to grow.
So you see this happen with companies all the time. I mean, let's take, there was this company, I think they were called Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Would that be an example of complacency? Like the end result, they go out of business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime you find yourself looking through a case study and you scratching your head and like, how could they have been so dumb? How could they have been so blind? Like, it's so obvious now.
Right.
The reason that they become so blind is because of an overconfidence, because they look at it and they see Netflix coming in that they could have, we all know the story. They could have bought Netflix, they could have whatever. And they look at it and say, nah, we know what we're doing. We've been successful so far and our model works. And so we don't need you newfangled people coming in here and telling us what to do, right? And so that's the problem. We've all seen the memes, right? Like, I survived lead paint and spankings and riding without seatbelts and and all these things. Click like if you did too. Well, the reality is that's called survivorship bias. And survivorship bias is a big thing that leads to complacency. If you didn't survive those things, you cannot click like. The only people who can click like are the ones who survive. So we assume that because we made it past some, artificial selection criteria, that we are right. And we start getting that overconfidence. So yeah, Blockbuster's a great example. I actually use, the flip side of that, because everybody talks about Blockbuster and how complacent Blockbuster was and how Netflix took over. But to me, my favorite part of that story is what happened afterwards and how vigilant and the vigilant behaviors that Netflix have employed to allow them to stay successful.
Yeah. So where does that complacency start? Have you kind of identified an area where it starts?
Again, it starts in that belief that what we've done before has worked, and so we know what we're doing.
So does it start at the C level? Does it start within the organization, or all the above?
All of the above. And so, this is what we get into in the book. Like, some of the things that we talk about is kind of top-down complacency.
Okay.
My hand over there. Top-down complacency. And some of it is bottom-up complacency. And that top-down complacency can bring about the bottom-up complacency. So there's a complacency at kind of the macro level where the C-suite is, getting complacent, but they can also be getting complacent because they're not getting a true vision into what's actually happening on the street, right? They might be looking at the wrong metrics. They might be given the wrong metrics, right? They might not be getting the people on the street or at the, at the customer level may not be engaged enough to be able to see the things that they should be seeing. That information doesn't make its way up. And so that bottom up complacency leads to top-down complacency. Right. It all kind of works together.
So do you see so let's talk about, so when you see it, you feel it maybe, what do you do to not cause it to be destructive and devastating to the point where it ends a company?
Yeah. So let's start with this. If you've had success, so if you're not we rarely see complacency with bootstrapping startups that are maxing out their credit cards and working out of mom and dad's garage.
Sure.
That's not where you see complacency, right? But if you're experiencing some success and you're feeling comfortable, just assume right now that there's a level of complacency somewhere in your business or in your life. It's there. So the question is, like you asked, how do we find it and how do we start fighting it?
Right.
And so that's where we get into, this is where people start getting a little uncomfortable with the conversation, because they start thinking, well, the opposite of complacency must be paranoia. And that sounds like crap. I don't want to be paranoid, right? So
people actually think they're paranoid if they're not complacent?
Like, well, really? they start thinking, well, like this vigilance, they assume is hyper vigilance, right? They assume like, well, gosh, don't I ever get to relax? I got to have my head on a swivel all the time because, anything around any corner can kill me, But the difference is the opposite is not paranoia. The opposite of complacency is vigilance. And the difference is this: paranoia is based in fear. Right. And vigilance is based in awareness. And that's where this all comes to play, is awareness, remaining in the moment, remaining intentional, planning ahead. All these things are where we can start fighting complacency internally. And a lot of what we talk about in the book are, 10 specific strategies that you can employ today. And a lot of that has to do with institutionalizing these practices within your life, within your business, so they become things that you do naturally, that are built to keep you aware. We have things that we do in law enforcement all the time. When I walk up to a car doing a traffic stop, I always touch the back of the car. Now, the lore behind that is because, I'm putting my fingerprints on there in case something happens, and then they can,
Okay.
But that's not the real reason that I do it. The real reason I do it is because that is a signal to me to get myself into vigilant mode, right? Because it's really easy for me to walk up to that car and be nonchalant because the last 1,000 traffic stops have gone fine.
Yeah.
And this could be the one, right? So that is a reminder that puts me in that mode. It is a process that I built in so that as soon as I touch that trunk, I'm in vigilance mode. Yeah. I understand what's going on. I know that I need to do the things that I need to do to keep myself safe. So building those things into our business and into our life allow us to remain vigilant without being crazy, right?
So let me ask you. I'm gonna test you, so to speak.
Oh boy, here we go.
I'd love to have one strategy that in business helps us overcome complacency, and one in our personal lives, because we can have complacency like we talked about in our personal lives as well. So what would you share?
How about if I give you one that you can use both places?
You know what? Over delivering. I love it.
Here's a great one. Debriefing. Okay. So we do this a lot in law enforcement and military and wherever, I'm not military, but military uses this, is this idea of debriefing, missions or projects or whatever we're doing. And the reality is when we talk to businesses and we ask people, do you guys debrief today? Most people will say yes. But if we dig a little bit deeper, you see that most people are using it only when things go wrong. Okay. And it becomes a blame game, right? Whose fault was it? Where did we mess up? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And when we have successes, it's all high fives and back pats and drinks and cake and whatever it is, right?
Makes sense.
But the reality is in law enforcement, we debrief regardless of outcome. So whether things turned out with a successful result or a negative result, we debrief. And we do it the same every time. And what this does is it allows us to catch the micro failures, right? Because the reality is we could have been successful by accident. We could have been successful despite ourselves. We could have been successful because our competition was worse than we were. Right. So, what I tell people is, here in Denver, I tell people to be Peyton Manning. In most other places other than like Indianapolis, I tell people to be Tom Brady. Don't be satisfied with success as on its own face value, because what we need to do is we need to have everybody in the organization or the team or whatever it is understand that we are going to debrief on a regular basis. Each of these things, it has two results. Number one is knowing that going ahead of time, people are more aware and more in the moment. They're paying more attention because they're going to have to explain things. Number two is it allows us to catch those micro failures before they become macro failures. And there's some specific ways I talk about in a book. One of the things is, obviously making sure that you do it regardless of outcome. Another thing is making sure that you leave titles and positions and tenure at the door. Everybody's equal and everybody gets an equal say. And there's 6 other things. But here's the thing. This is not just a business thing. This is an at-home personal life thing. We do the same thing in life with our family. We only talk about things when they go wrong. We talk about what happened with our kids, what happened with that test, why are you out so late? What's going on with this? With our spouses, we have our fights or our arguments or our quarrels over money or mental health or whatever it is, right? And so the reality is that we have to really consciously build into our family structure these debriefs that are going to happen also when positive things happen. We can talk about what went right. How do we make sure that goes right again? What went right but could have gone righter? This is why I have an editor, because I say things like righter. So these are the things that we need to do, and it doesn't have to be like a scheduled sit down in a family conference room meeting. It could be family dinner, once a week. Could be family breakfast. Could be a walk that we go on and we talk about things. It's equally important at home and at work.
Well, everything you're saying, Len, makes so much sense. I have this saying that nothing happens suddenly, it happens gradually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And complacency is it sounds like is the same thing, right? It just happens over time until the point where unaddressed it becomes devastating. So it sounds like great work, and oh my gosh, boy, do we need it, right? Because there's a lot of complacency around. Let's start with the government, Len. Let's start with complacency. Like, you write a book on that, and I think we would solve a whole bunch of issues. I think you'd have a bestseller there.
Well, I've got a couple of chapters that kind of deal specifically, and remember, everything that I learned and I'm applying back to business came from government work, right? Came from police. Yeah. And one of the key things, and one of the things that is talked about the most, not in these terms all the time, but is this idea of accountability and transparency. Right. And one of the things that happens, and one of the reasons why success breeds complacency, is because success also generates power. And when we have power, we can do things because we can, right? So I talk about this idea of being able to articulate the why, and it gets into having a purpose, right? And having a true purpose that goes beyond making money or whatever it is. If in law enforcement, we have to be able to articulate a why all the time. Why did I stop that person? Why did I ask them those questions? Why did I keep them there that long? I have to be able to answer all those questions, right? Yeah. And when you don't have to answer those questions, or when the answer to those questions become because I said so, or because this is the way we've always done it, you are abusing power at that point. Yeah. And that'll work for a little while. Yeah. But that doesn't last forever, right? Yeah. You don't have the power all the time. And so, the government has been notorious about doing this, right? Before we had body cameras, before we had, all the 20-second news cycle, right? Like, before we had all that, there was things that would get, that didn't have to get discussed or didn't have to get shown. Right. That lack of transparency and that lack of accountability allows power to be used in maybe not great ways. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what we can learn from government. And we have it in business. Like, as an entrepreneur, as you build power, you might have power over your employees. You might have power over your vendors, over your customers. How you use that power. We're seeing something right now, the Great Resignation, and everybody's talking about it as if it's a COVID thing. Yeah. This is not a COVID thing. No. This is something that's been brewing. You're talking about how, like, you don't see it, and then you see it. Yeah, right? You see it. Yeah. This has been brewing for a long time. People have been mistreating their employees. They have been underpaying them. They have been under-benefiting them. They have been, overworking them. And they could, because they had the power. And then all of a sudden things shifted. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's just interesting. Interesting times, opportunity times, right? For the people who get it. Okay, so let's shift gears on you. What's the best advice that you've ever been given? I think the best advice. So I've had the benefit, producing my brand ManageCamp conference for 19 years. I've had the benefit to sit and listen and talk to some of the greatest marketing and brand thinkers in the world. Sure. And that's been awesome for me. So I've got a lot of great advice. Yeah. But I would say probably the one that I use the most is from a guy by the name of Bruce Turkel. And he's actually in Florida. So we already mentioned Florida. So he's in Miami though. But his advice is this concept of it's all about them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we forget this in business. We forget that, a simple example is you have to put together a deck to present something to someone, and you make them sit through an hour and 100 pages of a deck because you want them to see all the work that you did, and you want them to appreciate everything that you did. Well, that's about you. That's not about them. Exactly. That's not what they needed out of that presentation. Yeah. Right. And so whatever it is, whatever you're doing in life, you got to realize that you got to make it about them, whether it's your customer or your vendor or your family or your employee. Make it about them and make sure that what you're doing is focused on them. Yeah. Right. And that'll solve a lot of problems in the world. Yeah. Makes so much sense. So let's flip it upside down, Len. What's the worst advice that you ever been given that hopefully you didn't follow? And if you did, what did you learn? Yeah. So I'm not going to mention names on this one, but when I when I started my ManageCamp event company, I was doing it kind of on the side while I was working for Campbell SoupCompany for 3 years. Okay. So for 3 years, I was doing it nights and weekends and just trying to see if I could, get things going.
Sure.
And it finally got to a point where, most entrepreneurs come up with it, where you get to a point where you got to choose. What am I going to do? I either got to put it all here or I got to put it all there. I can't cut it anymore.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to make the switch. And so, I was always above board with Campbell's and told them what I was doing. And, there was never, they always knew I had this other thing on the side going on.
Sure.
But I decided I was going to quit. And I started, I started, scheduling some exit interviews with people just to, tell them thank you and, tell them how much I appreciated them. There was one high up executive who I had my meeting with. And as I was sitting there, he just stopped me and said, Len, I'm going to stop you right there. Here's my advice to you. I want you to go home. I want you to write a letter as to how you're reversing your opinion and that you're going to stay here. You're not going to leave because this is the worst decision you could possibly make. It's not going to work for you. Wow. You gotta stay here. And, I'd already decided, of course. I wasn't asking for permission. I was just being nice, but I was kind of like dumbfounded, like, oh my gosh, like most people are just like, hey, good luck. This guy was like, which, I appreciated that he took, he felt that way and he had, the conviction and also cared about me enough to tell me how he felt,
right?
Which was great. I didn't agree with him,
right?
But I appreciated that he said it, but I did not follow that advice. I still like.
Thank goodness. Oh my gosh. Boy, there's a great example of maybe complacency, right? In his mind, thinking maybe.
Yep.
Well, Len, I'm going to do a little PSA here, and then I'm going to ask you for a final thought. So, sure. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you so much for supporting us, watching, listening, subscribing. You can go to www.thesuccessascent and sign up for updates. You can also go to your favorite podcast source. We're all over the place, too many to mention. Subscribe, leave us a review, share it. We just love doing this. I love to have folks like Len on and folks that just really deliver a high level. And certainly, Len, you did that today. So we do appreciate it. So what would you share with our listeners as a final thought or a final message as we sign off today?
Yeah, the big takeaway here, guys, is success is not the end goal. Keeping it is. And the biggest threat to that success is complacency.
Yeah.
So be vigilant.
I love it. I love it. And I've got your website scrolling. And so what will they get when they get there?
Yeah. So you'll learn all about me and the book is on there as well. You can get the book at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy books or ebooks or anything like that. You can also get some swag. So I've got these cool, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but these bracelets. I talk about reminders. This one says Be Vigilant on it.
Love that.
And you can get, a nice little laptop sticker to put on your laptop to remind you and anybody you're working with to be vigilant. So you can get those there as well. And you can also get a worksheet that you can go through while you're reading the book to keep track of all your thoughts.
I love it. Well, Len, again, thank you so much for everything you delivered today. When we go back and we listen and we pull all the things out, we're going to have some amazing content to share with people. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Pat. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And as I end every show, everybody, be happy, be healthy, and be safe until the next time. Take care.